Do you remember that morning? I remember where I was on 9/11. I'd grown up in the 80s and 90s, and wow, everything was great. Kids were still building forts in those days. Adults could still share their beliefs without fear of judgment over Thanksgiving dinner, and America just felt like nothing could ever stop our momentum. I was in college, I was 19, I was exhausted from staying up too late the night before, and I had an early morning class, but after, I decided to come back to the apartment, lay on the couch, and take a nap between classes. It wasn't but a few minutes until someone burst into the apartment and said, "Turn on the TV."
A tragic accident apparently has just happened in New York City. A plane has crashed right into the World Trade Center. You can see the smoke and the flames coming out of the shattered windows.
Oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one. Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
But I had no idea what terror could do when it threatened our own shores. I thought war was just something that happened over there. What did this mean? What did this mean about my future? What did this mean about the world, freedom, life? All seemed amazing, unstoppable, peaceful, until that moment that sent chills through the hearts and minds of every American citizen.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
To a 19-year-old today, they weren't even born yet. On a day that changed American history, society, and culture, they weren't even born. So we can't expect that 19-year-old today to be able to relate with the feelings and emotions we had before that date. Because once the events that took place on that day happened, we could never go back to the way it was before. It's with that idea that I want to take you to a date many years ago, before we humans arose on the scene. They say all is fair in love and war, but all is not fair. Why do the good die young? Why does evil prosper?
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
In this series, love and war find their beginning. Only by knowing their past do we get clues as to how the story ends.
The Bible does give President Trump moral authority to use whatever force necessary.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. How quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. This story starts up there, out there, in another place, on another planet. There are different names for this place: Jannah, Paradise, Zion, Elysium, Utopia. But for the sake of our story, let's call it Jannah, if that's okay with you. What's written about this place makes it sound pretty amazing. If we could take trips there today, we would see a lot of hashtags and selfies from Jannah. Life there is not naked babies floating in the clouds. Life there is not a man with 70 virgins. In fact, what's described is life a lot like what we experience today. At least if we remove the war and the death and the killing, affairs, disease, famine, and environmental destruction. All the things that fall under the heading of selfishness. Kind of hard to imagine, but go with me there. What are the best moments we can imagine here? And dream of a place without all the bad. The story goes like this. Everything was amazing. There are many planets out there with intelligent life, beings that don't get sick, that never taste death. They enjoy the best food, the best parties, the most amazing music, these unforgettable experiences, amazing friendships, you name it, they had it all. This galactic community, if you will, had one principle, one law by which all intelligent beings were subject to. This, we are told, is the way it was always, and it always had been that. But as long as everyone abided by this principle, all was well.
That principle was very clear. None lives to themselves. In other words, no one is to live solely for self. No one is to live selfishly. Some have described it more succinctly: love. As long as this one idea, this one principle was lived by, all was well. But that's where our story really begins. As friends were visiting friends, eating with friends, traveling with friends, listening to music with friends, at the beach with friends, diving with friends, flying with friends, news broke out that a coup was underway in the capital city of Jannah.
There had been whispers of something like this in the air, but few thought it could ever really happen. The ambassador, the prime minister, the one all looked up to for his wisdom, for his beauty, for his talent, Lucifer, was now leading this revolt.
The administration of Jannah apparently had a meeting, a private meeting in which Lucifer was not invited. He thought he deserved a place at the table. How could he not be invited to a meeting result in a coup?
Well, later on, we learned that the meeting he wasn't invited to was a meeting to discuss what plans should be carried out if any of the high intelligences of Jannah were to violate the law of love and walk in the path of selfishness. It hadn't happened before, but the meeting was held in case it ever did. So you can understand why Lucifer wasn't invited to that meeting. Well, we can understand now, but not in the moment.
In the moment, the idea of revolt, discussed in this private meeting, was a secret, a mystery whose possibility had been hidden for ages. I'll explain. Lucifer left and began to have a lot of side conversations throughout the coming days and months. He knew better, but slowly he began to choose to go his own way.
He didn't feel he was being treated fairly. Today, we would call it a coup, but we might call it anarchy, or as they called it, it was time for revolution.
It didn't happen overnight. You know, there were those conversations, those ones that start with, hey, did you hear? Hey, what do you think about? You know, they're subtle, they're slow, they're deliberate.
Those conversations where rumors start to grow and then the wounds, they fester and discontent spreads like a virus. Imagine if you and I were there in that moment. Lucifer begins to assert that within us all are these godlike qualities and that we were just being held down, that we needed freedom.
Under the campaign of offering true freedom, many of the inhabitants of Jannah were perplexed. And finally, after many conversations and campaign speeches, it finally came to a head. A meeting was called in the capital where some things were clarified. One in administration named Michael was declared as an equal with another in administration we will call Jah.
This was kind of an understood thing, but for some reason it needed to be made more clear. Lucifer bowed with all the rest, but soon after he was willing to serve under Jah, as he told everyone, but he would not serve Michael.
Around this time, the discussion arose that a new species of beings would be created. Much like how our best and brightest in Silicon Valley today are on the verge of quantum computing, wetware, and artificial intelligence,
where one day we may not even be able to distinguish the difference between human and machine. You know, these machines with human-like intelligence will be the dawn of a new era. Well, in a similar but arguably much more grand way, it was decided that a new species would inhabit the blue planet we now call Earth.
It was decided that man would be a new and distinct order. That's right, designers from another realm, having their hand in creating life. Lucifer wanted to take the lead in this, and he wanted to be involved in the design and the rollout of this project. But it was decided that Michael would be the one to lead out.
Lucifer thought he was the favorite to take this lead role, and in many respects he was. But the various ranks and divisions in Jannah, they were used to taking orders from Lucifer, so they also weren't sure of why Michael was leading out. There were many in the city that weren't sure who was right. Could it be that perhaps they were being limited or even repressed? Did they really have freedom like they thought they had? You know that feeling you get when you have been, so sure of something, then for some reason everything changes, you start to question all of your previous assumptions? Did they really enjoy all that freedom that they thought, or were they being manipulated? Was this real, or was this a simulation? Lucifer called all the citizens together and told them that all the liberty they had enjoyed was now coming to an end.
A new ruler had been appointed over them, to whom they from then on must serve like slaves. Lucifer stated that he had called all together to assure them that he would no longer submit to this invasion of his rights and theirs, and that never would he again bow down to anyone, that he would take the honor upon himself which should have been conferred upon him, and would be the commander of all who would submit to and follow him and obey his voice.
I hope you hear some of the irony in all that. It sounded like it made sense, but there was clearly contention among everyone. One contingent argued that nothing had changed. Lucifer was still in charge, and Michael had existed before their kind ever did. They had no reason to believe anything would change.
But doubt began to creep up in many minds. Private conversations began to be had all over the place, and for a time it seemed like Lucifer was seeking to promote peace and stability of the divine government. Many couldn't tell for the longest time where he stood.
All of his points seemed to make sense, but after a while you could just tell something's brewing. This is leading somewhere. This can't continue on like it is now. And one account describes a conversation Lucifer had with one of the citizens of Jannah. This citizen expressed that they had some issues with the administration. They didn't want to sound undecided, so naturally they showed sympathy for Lucifer's cause and told him of their support.
But then after these conversations like this and others, Lucifer would take these same words to other leaders in the city, and he'd use them to try and show how many were joining his cause while he remained publicly neutral. At one point, the majority of the citizens of Jannah were on his side, but somehow he played down his role in brewing the revolution.
After quite a bit of time had passed, the moment came when Lucifer shared that he had had enough. Millions marched to the capital to declare that they needed freedom. What they could not gain by persuasion and politics, they would gain by force. And here's the thing. There had been Senate meetings, and Michael had pleaded over many occasions that he was not out to remove anyone's liberty. But if that things weren't restored to peace, war, this foreign concept, would break out. And so they'd all been warned of this.
The citizens of Jannah didn't even know what war was. It had never happened before. So I dare say the gravity of the moment, nobody really comprehended it at all, until it was too late.
At the Capitol, Michael and Lucifer made clear what their sides on the issues were, and that once and for all, everyone would need to make a decision as to whose side they were on. And on this occasion, it wasn't just the citizens of Jannah, but also all of the leaders of all of the interstellar systems present as witnesses of this moment.
There were rumors that if his arguments were clear enough, Lucifer hoped to win the hearts of even the districts and become the leader of all realms. He argued that the citizens of Jannah needed no law, and perhaps others didn't either. Reports say that you could hear shouting and weeping as each side faced each other.
At one point, the majority were on Lucifer's side, and he declared that with a simple vote, the majority would vote him as supreme leader. He mocked the idea of how Jah and Michael and the slaves of Jannah would continue on without the presence of the majority and leave such a void in the capital. But even in that moment, Many one-on-one conversations were taking place, and many regained their reason and conscience and stated they would rejoin the ranks of Jah and Michael.
And at that moment, Jah stood up after all had been given plenty of time to make their choice, and it was shown that now the majority supported Michael. But Jah stated that the peace of all realms was because of the covenant, that no one is to live for self. But the crazy thing was that Michael kept being accused of being selfish, and that is where many deep down had questions that were unanswered. Maybe he was selfish, and all were given one last chance.
And as it is written in the Revelation, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
You may think you've heard this story. I thought I had, but you haven't heard the half of it. I'm here to tell you how this war came to earth, how it involves man,
And according to all the oracles, how it's going to end.